Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Welcome to Polycarp's Paradigm. My name is Eric Robinson, and I'm with my good friend, Michaela Barta, for TOB4, Theology of the Body, Episode 4 here on Polycarp's Paradigm. The first episode of TOB, we talked about an introduction, kind of high-level view. In the second episode, we talked about original humankind, original man, in his original solitude, original innocence, original unity, original nakedness, that they were naked and without shame. Then we talked about Christ's own words in the Sermon on the Mount in Episode 3, when we talked about the historical man, the man of concupiscence, where Jesus says not to even commit adultery in the heart, that if you look at a woman with lustful intent, that is committing adultery with her in his heart. When we grasp and when we make use of the other person rather than giving ourselves, that's really what lust is. But thanks be to God, through the redemption of Christ, through his grace, we can become masters over concupiscence. We can possess ourselves to then be a gift of ourselves. And we wanted to do a shorter episode today covering the difference between art and pornography, if you will. The difference between like sculptures and paintings and these masterful art pieces and the modern problem of pornography and evil that is. And it really comes down to, once again, that use versus gift. It comes down to intention of the artist and the viewer. And so, welcome again, Michaela. And we will dig in. Maybe I'll start with a quote here from TOB to kick it off here.
Okay.
And so he talks about pornography and pornovision. And I just think this is so relevant because there's a lot of people out there that do struggle with these things, and it's such a huge industry, like billions and millions of dollars, maybe trillions, I don't even know.
Yeah.
And what it's doing is it's degrading the human person. It's reducing the human person to an object. And so here's something JP2 says in TOB. The one as well as the other happens when one oversteps the limit of shame or of personal sensibility with regard to what is connected with the human body, with its nakedness. When in a work of art or by audiovisual media, one violates the body's right to intimacy in its masculinity and femininity, and in the final analysis, when one violates that deep order of the gift and of reciprocal self-giving, which is inscribed in femininity and masculinity across the whole structure of being human, precisely because of the great value of the body in this system of interpersonal communion, making the body in its nakedness, which expresses precisely the element of the gift, the object or subject of a work of art or an audiovisual reproduction, is a problem that is by nature not only aesthetic but also ethical. In fact, that element of the gift is, so to speak, suspended in the dimension of an unknown reception, of an unforeseen response, and thereby it is in some way threatened in the intentional order, in the sense that it can become an anonymous object of appropriation, according to which the good or evil of determinate actions of behavior, of morality and situations is formed, precisely because of his body and his sex, masculinity and femininity, the truth about man, the truth about what is particularly personal and interior in him, creates precise limits that one must not overstep. And I'll continue with some others later, but that's a lot.
That was a lot to read. Yeah. How would you recap that?
Oh my goodness, Michaela, don't test me here. Okay, so, well, actually, there's the next quote is like the summary of it all, which is perfect. But basically, we see in our human bodies, right, that we are made as a gift for the other. Mm-hmm. So what happens in pornography is it displays the human person, right? It displays their body, rather. And the body is meant to express the human person. But what it does, let's say it's an image. Let's say it's not a video, but let's say it's an image of a naked woman, let's say. Well, what this is saying is that instead of seeing this as a person, we can now use this body as an object of appropriation, as these words say. So an object of use.
Right.
And so really what we're doing by looking at that in that reductive way, that is meant to be looked at in a reductive way by the people that create these things.
Right. The intent of
the creator or the artist.
The artist in this capacity.
Is to arouse lust in us to where we reduce the person to an object, and we just grasp at that object for our own pleasure and enjoyment. Right. And so that person is this anonymous thing that is now an object for our use. Mm-hmm. And it's almost as if we are, this is pretty dramatic words, but it's almost as if we're raping the person because we're usurping the gift of themselves for our own pleasure without their consent. Even if they consented to the picture, we're violating
their dignity.
Exactly, we're violating their dignity, and making them an object of our own lust rather than a subject, a human person with infinite dignity and value that we are called to give ourselves to and be a gift for.
Right. That was great. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So, where do we go from here?
Well, honestly, this next quote, it's just perfect. I just have to do it. Okay?
How long is it?
It's not too long.
What's that mean?
You'll see.
Okay.
If our personal sensibility reacts with... So this is going into why do we react repulsively to these things? Or why ought we to react repulsively? If our personal sensibility reacts with objection and disapproval, the reason is that in this fundamental intentionality, together with the objectification of man and his body, we discover as something inseparable from the work of art or its reproduction, the simultaneous reduction of the human person to the rank of an object of quote-unquote enjoyment intended for the satisfaction of mere concupiscence. And this is opposed to man's dignity, also in the intentional order of art and reproduction.
It's opposed to man's dignity.
Yeah.
Even in the order of art and reproduction.
Yeah. So that's one thing he talks about is so we have sculpture and paintings that really are supposed to be a model of man's dignity, of humanity, really.
Yeah.
But the difference is that when we get into areas of audiovisual and photography, with those things, what happens is that now it's just a reproducing of the image. And that can be mass reproduced to create this anonymity, and once again it has that intentionality of creating lust and to create and basically reducing that human person once again to the object of use.
Yes. One thing that we learned, I finally found what I was looking for.
Oh, perfect.
We can say that the problem with pornography is not that it reveals too much of the person, but that it reveals too little of the person. In fact, its goal is to obscure the person, effectively concealing the person's true beauty and mystery. And I'm going to tack on here, and that when we perceive true beauty and mystery, it ought to lead us to wonder and awe and reverence.
Yes.
And then to not grasp and to treat with respect and love. So yes, the goal is to obscure the person. So then that paves the way, right, for use. So the problem with pornography is that it reveals not too much of a person, but that it actually reveals too little of a person. And so I have this appendix, it's called the ethos of the body in art. So can the naked body be portrayed in art without offending its dignity? What is the difference between the nakedness in the Sistine Chapel and the nakedness of pornography? Right. Okay. So we're getting into this, and so yes, a question that we can is the intention to arouse lust or to help us ponder the true beauty of the person, right? Because there's holy sacred art that has tons of naked people.
Yeah.
And so the intentions of the artists are in those cases, right? Sistine Chapel are to ponder the true beauty.
And rather than just reproducing the human body, they actually have that artistic ability to transfigure it, and it becomes truly a model that's meant to arouse in us, for lack of a better term, that wonder and awe
other
of the
than lust.
Arousing the wonder and awe of the dignity of the human person, of the human body, and like how awesome and how good it is. Whereas in the mere reproduction of the human person, or rather the human body, it reduces the body as merely a means of
to an end.
A means to an end, a means of satisfying your lustful desires, and it reduces once again that person to an object of lust.
Right. And
it doesn't become for us a model that reminds us of the dignity of the human person, right?
Right. And so in TOB 61, I guess, in 63, the portrayal of the naked body, you were getting into this, is a very delicate problem. The element of the gift is suspended in the dimension of the unknown reception of an unforeseen response. Yes, you were already saying this. There are works of art whose subject is the human body in its nakedness, which help us see the whole personal mystery of man. And so in contact with those works, in some way we learn the spousal meaning of the body, actually.
Yes.
Which corresponds to and provides the measure for purity of heart. On the contrary, there are also works of art that stir up objections, not because of their object, because in itself, so this is important, there are works of art, right, depictions of the human body, that not because of their object, because in itself the human body always has its own inalienable dignity, but because of the quality or way of its artistic reproduction. So we do have to clarify that the reason why the works of art are objectionable has nothing actually to do with the human body, in the sense that the human body always has that inalienable dignity. I said that word weird, but because of the quality or way that it is artistically reproduced, as Eric has been saying.
So it comes back to the human heart, right?
So it comes back to, exactly, Eric. It comes back to the human heart of the artist and then the recipient of the art. It really comes back to that. And God does allow us, which is beautiful. Like, God does allow us to portray art, and to portray the human body in art. And to do that, and to give people that freedom to be led to wonder and awe. Can the recipient of something be drawn, into lust?
Yeah.
I mean, of course they could. Does it mean we stop making good art because of the recipient's heart is not yet moved towards transformation? No, we should keep making good art. And it means, I think sometimes people, particularly who might just tend towards being a bit more rigid about certain things, especially when we're talking about art and media and movies and things, we have to be careful also not to just try to cut everything off and say, well, we can't depict the human body because people are going to lust no matter what. Okay, well, that is not also calling out the dignity and calling forth the dignity of those people and saying, no, we are going to still continue to make good art, and we're going to portray the human body in beauty, and we're not going to. We know that you have the capacity for more, and so we're not going to acquiesce, and we're calling you to, and it's your choice. Like if people choose to receive the art in a way that is degrading, that is in their own heart.
And I think we can tell, like, if you go to a movie and there's a sex scene.
Sure.
And you can tell if the sex scene is meant to arouse lust in you, or if it's meant to, let's say it is a sexual scene between a married couple, but it doesn't show too much or something like that.
Yeah.
And you leave the movie thinking, wow, like that really depicted the intimacy between the couple in a great way, or something like that.
Yeah.
Versus like leaving there and being like, oh my goodness, like,
yikes,
yeah. Well, one example is that movie I mentioned, I think in the last episode, Trafficked, that I saw about human sex trafficking. Whenever they do have scenes that are a little more graphic and kind of show, like, it actually does a really good job of not showing nudity really, or too much of what's going on, but it shows you enough to where you know that the artist's intention behind it is to make you disgusted at sex trafficking and what is happening to these poor women and being abused, and it does not arouse lust in you, or that is definitely not the purpose. The purpose is to show how awful lust actually is. And so there's scenes like that happen where it's like, maybe it's in a movie where it shows premarital sex, but it does it in such a way to where it's like not glorifying that at all, but actually shows how harmful that can be to the people involved, and heartbreaking, and how it's not a good thing. Like in the TV series Stranger Things, that happened, and I just recently watched some of those episodes, and it was like amazing to me how it really does show that what those teenagers were doing was not a good thing. And you get that sense of like emptiness, and it actually has a good message because it's saying, hey, this is not the fullness of sexuality at all. Like, this is not a good thing that's happening. This is completely the use of another person, basically, and the manipulation of another person to acquire that use. And so I think when we're talking about art and all these things, it does come back, like we've been saying, the artist's intent and then also the recipient's intent. And we have to know ourselves pretty well and know our boundaries, to where it's like, okay, if you're sensitive to these things, which we ought to be, that you're not just going to see a movie that has an arousing scene. And even if the creator's intent is meant to be artistic, to show the dignity of the persons and all that, but if your heart's not in the right place, it might not be good. Or if this could be applicable to the Sistine Chapel or the Sculpture of David. Like, if you are looking at that with the intent of lusting,
or if you just simply like can't. If there's just impulses or things like rising up, you have to, what JP2 starts talking about is talking about the difference between virtue and continence. Yeah. And saying that purification begins with continence. And so you might have to say no to a lot of things. Right. Because of where you or I, right, where a person is at. That another person who is a bit further along on the journey is able to enter into. They might be able to watch movies, right, with good intent of these more, JP2 says, like, delicate things. And other people, it may not lead them to an occasion of sin, and they may be able to receive it because their hearts are more purified. And so it's not a black and white answer where, oh my gosh, like, with a lot of things, like, there's a lot of gray and other colors, where it depends on where you are at, honestly. And, recognizing that it's important to just not throw out all of the good kinds of art, or even just like secular movies that speak truth and speak goodness and beauty, and might have some weeds in them, but there's a lot of wheat, and like holding on to the wheat.
And another thing that he talks about when distinguishing between art and pornography, and one of the reasons why pornography is so bad too, is that once again, the people that are depicted, even if they voluntarily chose, which by the way, most of those people have been abused or are in that situation and have been manipulated to be so. But let's say they freely chose, they are still being an anonymous object of lust, and so you are appropriating them without choice, without their consent. And so what this is all talking about, what we're all dealing with here, is St. Paul VI in his encyclical Humanae Vitae. He is advocating for creating a climate favorable to education and chastity. And chastity is that integration of our sexuality. It's not just renunciation of our sexuality, because we're sexual people. Like, that's a good thing.
Spirituality and sexuality.
Exactly. They go, and when we properly integrate those, it's always through that lens. It needs to be through that lens of gift. Yep. And so I think that's something we were saying over and over in this TOB series, is the difference between use and gift. But that's huge. That's everything, right?
Yeah. It is. And I guess the last thing that I wanted to know that's really cool that Michael Waldstein.
Yeah, he wrote the introduction to
TOB.
To the
book.
The book.
But he was like he was like a friend of JP2, right? Wasn't he?
I think so.
Or was that George Weigel?
Well, he's a smart man.
Yeah, Michael Waldstein is a great, he's just a student of John Paul's writings. And so Michael says that, speaking of the Sistine Chapel, and I think this is a really cool thing for us to, at least the last word from me, Eric, is... he says that, speaking of the Sistine Chapel and talking about purity of heart with the artist and the recipient, then actually art, right? So like any of us who are creatives or artists in any capacity, as we continue on the journey of growing more and more and more in purity of heart, our art will change too. And so he says, Michelangelo himself must have looked at his naked models in a pure way in order to be able to paint nudes in that pure way. It would most likely be presumption to think that one can watch a pornographic movie with the same purity of heart. And so he gets into talking about how even Michelangelo allowed himself to be guided by the words of the book of Genesis, in which man and woman were both naked and felt no shame. So Michelangelo absolutely would have had a certain amount of purity of heart to be able to depict this art in a way that is beautiful and glorifying to God, and glorifying of the truth of the human person. So we can see that this task is truly possible, and it's worthy of man, and it's worth being carried out, this task of working on purification.
Yeah. So hopefully that's an encouragement to everyone to create art with the intention of valuing the human person, the dignity of the human person, of calling people forth to love and not lust, and the gift.
And the more that you do that in real life, the more that your art, the overflow, will become, be
and the
purified.
more we cultivate chastity and purity in our own lives, the more we can actually appreciate genuine art for what it's meant to do. And so I just want to close with this statement about purity. I mentioned it last time. It's so good. Purity is the glory of the human body before God. Whoa. All right, everyone. We promised a shorter episode. We're going to stick to that.
We are.
So till next time, have a good one, everyone. See ya.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.